and has been responsible for overseeing the regulation of surface coal mining in the state. In addition to his public service, he also served a little tour of duty as the executive director of the Harold Schaefer Leadership Foundation, which connects emerging leaders from the University of Mary with community business leaders. And during my time as a Bismarck City Commissioner, I know we really appreciated working with Kevin and working through the Bismarck Development Association on many projects with his leadership at the University of Mary. Kevin is known for encouraging the industry to find solutions to the many challenging issues facing the future development of Lignite in our state, and we appreciate the way in which he approaches it. Please help me welcome Commissioner Kevin Cramer.
Thank you, Sandy. Good to be with all of you, partners in this industry. And I consider you exactly that, partners. Partners that work together for solutions to what this country needs. Before I get started, I want to introduce the most important partner. My partner, my wife Chris, is with us this morning. She drives everywhere we go. Say hi to Chris. I also want to thank the Lignite PAC for their endorsement. I appreciate that very much. And it really is more than the check, John. It really is. It's the confidence that comes with it that means so very much to me. You join a long list of pro-growth, pro-business endorsements. I've been endorsed by your guest yesterday, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Federation of Businesses, the Associated Builders and Contractors, the Association of General Contractors, North Dakota Bankers, and a long list of organizations that build this state and build this country. So I'm grateful for your endorsement as well. I also want to thank Pam for being here. She's been a courageous debater. We've been together a lot. And one of the things about politics is by the end of a campaign, by the time you get to the election, you get to know your opponent so well. As she said the other day, we can finish each other's lines sometimes. But you also share a bond because there's no other person in the state that understands what you're going through better than the person you're running against. And so it's important work. And John, thanks for the reminder about last night and about this great country. And watching those two gentlemen debate after we got home on tape delay was a great joy. And Pam, you're right. Ed Schaefer will make a fine energy secretary someday. Yes. And I want you to know, Pam, if you noticed in my farm ad, I had enough sense to put a yellow, a red, and a green machine in it. Actually, that was just luck. The farmer just happened to have a lot of machinery. At any rate, it's good to be with you. Chris and I had a great experience recently. We were in Washington for a meeting with leadership. There were about 50 members of Congress sitting around a big table. And just before Eric Cantor was to introduce me, he began reading this biography, talking about my years as tourism director in North Dakota and 4 years as economic development director. Now I'm a public service commissioner. And before I could start speaking, Paul Ryan, who's sitting right across the table, raised his hand and said, "Wait a minute, I have a question, Mr. Speaker." He said, "Kevin, what was your pitch when you were tourism director?" I said, "Well, Mr. Chairman, let me tell you, when I was the tourism director in North Dakota, besides having more fun at work than I deserved, we had the distinction of being the least visited state in the country. But today, as an energy regulator, when I walk in the room with the brand of North Dakota, it is as though Walt Disney himself walked. You ask the question, what can a freshman do? Let me tell you the advantage a freshman from this state has. You carry with you a brand that everybody understands, everybody acknowledges, and everybody respects. Not because of the work government does, but because of the work you do. And government has the sense to step back and let it happen with a light regulatory touch. So thanks for the honor of doing that for the last several years. And I said to him, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Budget Chairman, I said, when we come from North Dakota, we don't come with our hand out, but we come with solutions. Solutions to what ails this country. Because I always say America's national security and America's economic security are tied directly to America's energy security. And we know how to do it. Do you know why we do it so well? Do you know when I became a public service commissioner? Now don't boo me when I say this, John. North Dakota was 50th in the country in wind energy. Our neighbors to the south, South Dakota, which by the way, they're just as windy as we are. They're actually closer to the markets. They have fewer transmission constraints, and they were whooping us. And then we made some tweaks to the legislation. We made North Dakota a friendlier place to develop. And we watched as North Dakota went from 0 megawatts to 1,500 megawatts of nameplate capacity, while South Dakota went to 400. And then you see what happens when there's a few billion barrels of recoverable oil and gas under the ground. There's lots of oil in lots of places, offshore, Rocky Mountains, a lot of it under federal land. But you don't see them developing it there like they do here. Why is that? I maintain it's because we've been doing energy development for decades in North Dakota. You taught us how to do it. The lignite industry taught us how to develop energy resources. Second to none. So when these other opportunities came, we were better prepared at the state level. I'm always amused when our president likes to take credit for the fact that we've gone from 60% dependency on foreign oil to 42% under his watch. And I'd say, well, wait a minute, Mr. President. All of that growth is under private land. Because where there's federal land, we've lost production. And that gets to the heart, Sandy, of one of the questions you asked my opponent about federalism, federalizing regulation. I am an ardent advocate and an enforcer of state primacy. The Constitution of the United States guarantees it, and our culture lives with it, and I will fight for it with every breath that I have. Recently, Senators Hoeven and Murkowski co-sponsored legislation giving to the states primary control in regulating oil and gas, especially the fracturing of the well, right? Good legislation. Shouldn't have been necessary. And I applaud their leadership because it demonstrates a much-needed pushback to this aggressive environmental agenda of the left, which only seeks to reverse the energy revolution here in North Dakota and other places. And it's encouraging that other branches of our federal leadership have taken good action. Just a few weeks ago, the Federal District Court of Appeals ruled that the EPA had in fact overstepped their interpretation of the Clean Air Act on several fronts. Specifically, allowing the EPA to penalize states for emissions above what they were actually emitting. Does that make sense? And two, assuming federal control rather than accepting the historic norm of its first deferring to state authority. Both these items are concerning. And it's not novel for environmental extremists to distort or outright invent data to pursue their real objectives. They're doing it right now in North Dakota. Providing political fodder for mean-spirited and untrue campaign ads. But what makes this so concerning is that none of these people were elected. In fact, they're defying the representation of elected officials. The second item, that of assuming immediate federal control, is especially intriguing, in that it bears a striking resemblance to this situation we're facing right here in North Dakota, where radical out-of-state environmentalists have sued the Secretary of the Interior because he dismissed their charges. And now they want to take rest away from the North Dakota Public Service Commission, our regulatory jurisdiction over your industry, as though they can do it better at the federal level. I'm glad that the United States Attorney General, along with our Attorney General, are defending our position, not the position of the radical environmentalists. And Sandy, you raised a great point in your question earlier. Anybody who remembers civics knows that we have a Constitution. A Constitution that a lot of members of Congress and those that would aspire to be one would do well to read. that guarantees primacy to states for overseeing so many of these things. So I pose to you, do the majority of our citizens accept ceding all control to Washington, D.C.? Have we truly become that apathetic in this country? You don't have to be running for office to expose the falsity of that argument. And this is an important challenge I have for you all. I was so proud of our friend Bob Benson. A few months ago, I had my friend Steve Moore, the head economic writer for the Wall Street Journal and on the Wall Street Journal editorial board, out to Fargo to speak to the Chamber of Commerce of Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo at their economic summit. And I was kind of amused by the fact that the agenda of the Chamber wasn't exactly the agenda of the Wall Street Journal. But Bob Benson was on a panel with Steve Moore, and he set them all straight. Bob, I'll never forget that day, because you stood there strong and firm and unapologetic. We cannot cower. Ladies and gentlemen, I know some people think I'm reckless in my rhetoric, but doggone it, I don't think we ought to back down to bullies. I think we ought to double down to bullies. That's the North Dakota way. We can't get like this and start acquiescing. Remember the 1980s? In North Dakota, we did that. Then along came Ed Schaefer. Changed the entire personality of our state, made us believe in ourselves again, and we're now the envy of 49 other states. Because we've set a foundation, created a culture, an environment in which we don't apologize for free enterprise, we champion it. And although oil and gas has reached recent prominence in our state's energy sector, this energy sector, Lignite, has been vital, consistent part of our economy for decades. And the war on coal that's been initiated by the fringe of our society and furthered by our federal government is alarming. It's interesting that the current administration rose to power on the hope of change. And yet they've shown no motivation to deviate from the established liberal playbook of power by fear and deception, placating to those stakeholders who derive their existence from government influence rather than utility. Stream buffer zone rules might make sense in Tennessee, but make no sense in North Dakota. Utility MACT. You're all familiar with that. Greenhouse gas rules of the EPA. Clear demonstrations of what is now the Washington norm. The Utility MACT, rule or maximum available control technology, was promulgated by the EPA to target mercury emissions from coal-fired energy power plants like those that many of you own, manage, support, supply, buy your power from. It's indisputable that the ingestion of mercury is harmful to humans and to the environment. Yet, without supportive data, the EPA has set unrealistic mercury emission standards to achieve unsubstantiated benefits. Where's the common sense? What this policy will reduce in fuel diversification will only be matched by a correlating decline in jobs, right here in our state and elsewhere. Our economy can't afford it in this country, ladies and gentlemen. I mentioned earlier that the Federal Court of Appeals had recently overturned some EPA overreach. Unfortunately, this was the exception rather than the rule. That same court in late June of this year upheld the EPA's interpretation that carbon dioxide endangers public health and safety, thereby validating EPA rules restricting reported greenhouse emissions. There's no doubt that the current administration will utilize this victory to strangle the coal industry. In effect, all new coal-fired power plants will be too unmarketable to build. And aren't we seeing that happen? As a result, there will be more burden placed upon natural gas as the staple energy source for electrical generation. And I've warned the utilities, and while I like to see some natural gas plants, in fact, I think we should see one more in North Dakota as a way to back up some energy as a highly dispatchable source for peaking. I think it makes sense, especially given we have so much of it here. But I've seen natural gas be $14 a decatherm, and I've seen it be $2 a decatherm. And yet coal is the consistent player for decades and decades. By the way, we have an 800-year supply of lignite coal under the prairies of North Dakota at today's burn rate, currently economically recoverable. In my view, it would be immoral to leave it there. And God will take care of us. You know, I want to set a couple of other things straight. We talk about who supports this industry. Elections are about choices. I like friendly debate. In fact, I like rigorous debate. I think the fact that men died in the Revolutionary War, that men and women have been dying ever since for the right to participate in politics ought to be guaranteed to everybody, including you. We, in democracy, enjoy the fact that we get to help pick the people that regulate us. I've given money to Corey Farm, and I'm a taxpayer. He's a tax commissioner. You ought to be able to give as a taxpayer to the tax commissioner whose candidate whose philosophy best suits yours. You shouldn't run from it or have somebody be sued for it. If you're a farmer and you don't like the job that the current ag commissioner is doing, you ought to be able to donate to his opponent. That seems logical in a free country. And that gives me chills to hear people propose something different. So there's a difference between my opponent and me. While she's supported your industry from time to time, let's talk about one particular vote. Senate Bill 2339. Many of you might remember it. Some of the people in this room testified to it. Basin Electric, I know, was a big one. John, you testified on 2339 in 1997. Here's the bill. Simple. 10-year exemption from property taxes for a possible CO2 pipeline that would take CO2 from the Dakota gas plant to the oil fields for enhanced oil recovery. Seemed like a good idea. Basin was facing perhaps losing as money as $25 million because they had this product that was a waste. In fact, according to the EPA, it's a pollutant. Wouldn't it be nice to find a good solution with that? Huh? And so some senators, including Randy Crispin, who carried it to the floor of the Senate, saw the wisdom and passed it out 46-0 at Senator Crispin's encouragement. Went to the House Finance and Tax Committee, where it got nearly a unanimous do pass out of committee. Only one person in the committee voted against it. My point. Then it went to the floor, where 92 members of the House of Representatives also saw the wisdom of it and supported it. There was one vote against it. My opponent. In one vote, she voted against coal, oil, natural gas, a solution to CO2, and rural electric cooperatives. One vote. Now here's the good news. She didn't have enough influence to bring a second vote along, much less a majority. Ladies and gentlemen, it's important to be right on the issues. It's not enough, to have a nice culture. It's important to be right on the issues and to be able to articulate them and to bring people along when you are right on the issues. I was very proud last summer to be invited to a little picnic, a social gathering on a ranch in western North Dakota when Jim Cramer from CNBC was out here to take his show or to do his show live, Mad Money. I don't know if you all watch Jim Cramer very often. He spells his name right. He calls me Cousin Kevin. We're not related, as far as I know. Entertaining fellow. Kind of anti-coal, And we're talking about oil and gas and pipelines and gas plants and what's going on in the Bakken. That's what the show was going to be about. I said, but Jim, you know something else? We're the 6th leading exporter of electricity, generated by burning 30 million tons of lignite coal every year. I'm kind of against coal, he said. I said, I know, I watch your dumb show. But he says, I'm not against making money. I said, good, because the result of that 30 million tons of lignite coal being burned into electricity and put on transmission lines is this. We in North Dakota enjoy the lowest retail residential rates of electricity in the country. And that's not because I'm a great economic regulator. He said, wow, you got to get Yahoo out here and Google, and you got to get big server farms. I said, there's plenty of load right now. But you're right. You gives us a global competitive edge. And I love telling the story. And the next day he was on there going, and you know these people have an 800-year supply of lignite coal under the ground, and as a result they have the lowest priced electricity in the country. You're right, we have to tell our story. And tell it with passion and conviction, unapologetically, and with a great platform. I want to do that for you. Let me tell you something else I'm not going to do when I'm in Congress. I'm not going to vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House because God help us if Henry Waxman becomes chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee again. I just assume be on the Energy and Commerce Committee than have Henry Waxman be the chairman. Climate change, Barack Obama has already announced is going to be one of his top priorities next year if he's reelected. We already know that it's Henry Waxman's. He's the guy that's holding up the Keystone XL pipeline too. People, these decisions matter. Who goes to Congress matters. Who's elected matters. Who your champion is matters. It's not just a vote. It's not just a vote. We only get one. You know, what I think I'd like to do before I wrap up is take some questions, but I want to say one thing about my friend Randy Crispin too. I've already said a couple of things. You don't need me to tell you about his credentials. This race is so doggone important for the Public Service Commission, I can't tell you. You all are familiar, at least those of you that lobby, with his opponent. I mean, he's the guy that when he testifies, legislators will get a cup of coffee, but it's not good. The idea that we're going to forward policies that will raise the price of our electricities in order to manipulate markets makes sense in some places, but not in the state that has the best economy in the world. I'd say let's take common sense like Randy Crispin provides, get him on the Public Service Commission, and continue to make North Dakota the envy of the rest of the country. With that, here's what I want to do. I want to answer questions and talk about things that might be on your heart, specific things. So I'm just going to throw it open to the floor for you all. Does anybody out there have a question you might want to ask me either about the campaign, or about public policy, energy policy, or something else? Somebody's got to have it. Did I cover it all? John, what didn't I cover? Is that okay? Sandy, do you have anything I haven't covered?
I think you got it.
Well, let me say this then. Let me wrap up with this. As I said earlier, I don't back down to bullies, I double down to bullies. But I do it with a cheerful disposition. Because, frankly, one of the things that's missing right now in our politics in this country are people who love each other. People who disagree, but do it agreeably. But who still love this country and want the best for it. I look forward to going to Washington, building those coalitions with you. But standing firm for the things that matter the most. And let me say this, and wrap up with this, because it's so doggone important. Because it's important, an important testimony to the work that you do. When others in the country are looking at your industry and putting it down because of some crazy notion about emissions or coal dust or open pit mines, I said to Jim Cramer, I said, Jim, if I was to put you on the top of Antelope Valley Station and say you point out reclaimed land for me and compare it to undisturbed land, he said, I suppose I could do it. I said, that's right. You want to know why? I said, because out here, we understand the importance of the sustainability of the land because we live it. We live it. And I said, as a regulator, I look pretty smart, but I never take credit for what's under the ground. I look pretty smart because at least at 90% of the hearings that we hold, and we always hold the hearings in the communities most affected by an investment, whether it's a pipeline, transmission line, even a coal-fired power plant, wind farms, gas plants. I've overseen literally dozens, if not hundreds. We hold them in the communities most affected to maximize the opportunity for the public to participate. Because when public officials don't leave themselves available to the public, they not only rob the public of the opportunity to have a say, but they rob themselves of the wisdom of the public. And at least 9 out of 10 times, not a single member of the public shows up. Not because I'm a great politician or a great regulator, but because the corporate citizen working with the local citizen works best. And if a fight breaks out, then a regulator has to come in. But generally speaking, the heavy lifting is done long before it gets to the Public Service Commission. We can do the same thing with American culture as well. And you have nothing to apologize for mining that coal. You have every reason to be proud of what you do. Whether you mine it, reclaim it, burn it, or service the industry. Because the same God who created the majesty of the Badlands, the splendor of the prairies, the richness of the topsoil, put the minerals underneath it. And He gave it to all of us, His most precious creation, to use for their benefit, His glory. Thank you all for listening. God bless you. God bless you.
Kevin, thanks so much. We are now going to take a short break till 10 o'clock.